Authorities say they stopped a child suicide bomber moments before he detonated his explosives.
We are seeing ISIS using a frightening army of soldiers to fight its horrific war. Frightening because they are children. A recent ISIS video showed.
In 2015, Iraqi officials reported that as many as 500 children were kidnapped by ISIS to serve as suicide bombers and child soldiers.
These pictures show the so-called Islamic State.
The use of children as weapons is not new. Children have been used by genocidal regimes throughout history, from Pol Pot's creation of a cruel child army in Cambodia to Hitler's Nazi youth group.
To embed ISIS ideology into the next generation.
ISIS deploys the same tactic today. To add to its horrific human rights record, it also poisons the minds of young people and uses them for mass murder. ISIS recently used a 13-year-old boy as a suicide bomber, who went on to kill and injure over 150 people. ISIS is known to invest considerable resources into creating an army of ideologically indoctrinated children called the Cubs of the Caliphate, who have been exposed to little more in their short lives than the deadly ideology of the Islamic State. It has created an estimated 22 schools where children are reportedly schooled in execution methods, often practicing on dolls, a grotesque mockery of how they might use such toys if they were allowed to live out healthy and normal childhoods. Young children are considered by most people to be the purest incarnation of humanity, the essence of innocence. Thus, a regime that is able to use children as cannon fodder represents one of the most heinous violations of every known human rights norm. The same applies to training children in the practice of torture and murder.
Getting more information about ISIS military training isn't easy. Thousands of Syrian refugees now live in Turkish border towns. But ISIS is here too.
The conscription of children is partially the result of the poverty surrounding ISIS-controlled territories.
For all their deluded religious rhetoric, the use of children to commit human rights abuses speaks to the real moral bankruptcy of ISIS. They use children in their warfare because they rightly assume that those that they are fighting against hold young lives sacred and would not wish to harm a child. By using children as weapons, they are ironically admitting the moral superiority of those they denounce. They advertise to the world that they cannot win any sort of battle based on the strength of their ideological position or even the bravery of their members. They can only win by preying upon and exploiting the goodness of those they are fighting.
At 14, Abu Ibrahim, not his real name, joined the ISIS army after they convinced him they were pure Muslims.
ويجب أن أقدم كل ما لدي لأنصر هذه الدولة لأنها كانت في نظري دولة مظلومة يجب أن تفديها ولو بنفسك.
But when they threatened to kill his brother, Abu Ibrahim lost faith in ISIS and fled. ISIS videos show children being put through rigorous physical training.
By turning vulnerable young people into killing machines, ISIS has shown that its purpose is to turn innocence into violence, to turn purity into bloodshed. Their vision of a utopia is one in which children are taken directly from the cradle into a life of cruelty, violence, and death.
Boys are told they too will be killed if they don't join ISIS by age 16. But death is not the only punishment for refusing to join ISIS. Omar is 14. He'd been serving with more moderate opposition forces. ISIS fighters captured and then tortured him to try to force him to join them.
بالسجن ظلت شهر ونص يعني تحت التعذيب ومشبوع. انك ليش ما تبايع الدولة وليش ما تبايعنا؟ وليش ما تقاتل النصيرية معانا؟ ليش ذبحوا نص المسلمين؟
He says he refused to join and was sentenced to a horrifying punishment.
لموا العالم كلياتها جدا بالعالم لفوا لي يدي من هنا ورجلي كمان وخدروها تخدير وكمان زاد رجلي تخدير حطيت ايدي على الخشبة بساط ورقصوا لي ايدي لفوا لي اياها بعدين زاد رجلي كذلك زاد قصوها ولفوا لي اياها.
These photos show Omar's actual amputation. And the man known as the bulldozer, who he says severed his limbs. Omar's amputations were carried out just 3 weeks before we met him. He'd escaped Syria only days before. The price of his defiance is constant pain and depression.
من ننزل جو ما أطلع لليل مشان إني متعبة من الدرج. من يعني قطعوا لي يدي ورجلي طابت نفسي من الحياة. ما ظل ما أقدر لا أمشي لا شيء.
Omar's public punishment was used as a warning to children not to resist ISIS.
جابوا أطفال وشبابي. لما هو العالم إنه هذا كافر مرتد حكمنا عليه قص اليد ورجله وقص ايده ورجله. كل شيء واحد يقاتل دولة الإسلام بإذن الله لا نقصه لا نقص ايده ورجله.
ISIS uses Islamic religious texts to justify turning children into the jihadis of tomorrow. But this use of Islamic doctrine horrifies millions of Muslims around the world. We must use our voices, which can be amplified now by social and digital media, to denounce ISIS's moral hypocrisy and delusion. An entire generation of young minds is at stake, and our own civilization cannot survive if we tolerate the existence of a monstrous movement that uses children as weapons of mass murder.